He thought it was just another broken-down car, just another stranger on a quiet stretch of road. But that afternoon wasn't about fixing a car. It was about fixing something neither of them knew was still broken. She didn't ask for much, just a place to stay the night. What she brought with her was something no one saw coming. Sometimes it's not the loud moments that break you open. It's the small ones, the ones that remind you how it felt to be needed again. He couldn't save his past, but this time, he didn't run. He held the line. And from the ashes, something rooted, something real. If you believe in second chances, in quiet heroes, in homes built by choice, tap subscribe and stay with us. This is where the story begins. With a knock, a storm, and a door that wouldn't stay closed. The rain had started just after 4. Not the kind that danced on rooftops like in old songs, but a thin, cold drizzle that clung to the skin and worked its way into the bones. Ethan Reeves hated that kind of rain. Sneaky rain, he called it. The kind that didn't knock, didn't roar, just seeped through the cracks of a man's armor and reminded him how alone he really was. He had just locked up the garage, the last of the tools wiped down and stacked where they belonged. The engine, hoist, still creaked sometimes, even when untouched. A ghost in the shop, he thought. Fitting. He turned the collar of his flannel shirt up, tugged his cap low, and stepped toward the porch of the old house behind the workshop. That's when he heard it. The grind of worn brakes, tires slipping slightly on wet gravel, then silence. A silver sedan, dented near the fender, pulled off the road and stopped in front of the shop. The headlights stayed on, blurring in the drizzle. For a second, Ethan just watched. He wasn't in the business of helping anymore. People brought trouble, even when they came smiling. Then the door creaked open, and she stepped out. A woman, early 30s maybe, younger than him, but old enough to carry something heavy in her eyes. She wore a light sweater, far too thin for the cold, soaked through already. In her arms she held a child, a little girl bundled in a puffy coat, her dark curls plastered to her cheeks. She was quiet, too quiet. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something he didn't want to name. "Car won't start," the woman called out, her voice low but clear. "Battery, maybe. Or the alternator. I'm not sure." He didn't answer right away, just stood there under the porch light, rain dripping from the edge of his cap. "You're a mechanic, right?" "I was," he said. A beat passed. She didn't step closer, just looked at him with a kind of patience that came from long miles and deeper fears. "Do you live here?" she asked. He nodded. She hesitated. "We don't need much, just somewhere dry for tonight, just for a night." That was the moment he would remember later, the moment his life divided cleanly into before and after. He almost said no. The word sat on the edge of his tongue like an old reflex. No meant safe. No meant control. Then the little girl looked up at him. Big brown eyes. No fear, just waiting. A quiet question. "Are you the kind that turns people away?" Ethan let out a long breath. "There's a shed out back," he said finally. "It's not much, got a cot and a working heater." The woman nodded. "We'll take it." He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. He didn't ask about the bruises half hidden under her sleeve, or the way she clutched the girl like someone might snatch her away. Instead, he led them around the side of the house, the path muddy beneath their feet. He flicked the porch light, on with a switch inside the back door. The shed stood crooked against the tree line, its roof patched with tin and memories. It used to be his wife's garden workshop. Shelves still held clay pots, old tools, and jars of forgotten seeds. Ethan unlocked it, stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar and earth. Dry, at least. "I'll bring some blankets," he said, already turning away. "Thank you," she whispered. Back, inside his kitchen, he stood still for a long time. His hands hovered over a cabinet handle, unsure of what they were doing. Then they moved on their own, like memory guiding them. He poured hot water into a mug, stirred in cocoa powder, the cheap kind he hadn't touched in years. He remembered the way his daughter used to hum while it was warming, how she'd blow, on it, always impatient, always burning her tongue. He carried the mug outside. The woman was sitting on the cot, cradling the girl, who looked up as he entered. Ethan knelt and held out the mug. "For her," he said. The woman took it carefully. Their fingers brushed. Her hands were cold. She looked him in the eyes then. Really looked, and something passed between them. Not trust, not yet. But maybe, a beginning. "She doesn't talk much," the woman said. "Not since—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "I understand," Ethan said. He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't tell her that he hadn't spoken to anyone outside a grocery line in months, that his world had shrunk to engine parts and silence, that sometimes when he passed his daughter's empty room, he still saw the sunlight where her toys once lay. "Rest," he said. "I'll be out here." He stepped back into the rain, but he didn't feel it anymore. Inside the house, he stood by the window, watching the shed's porch light flicker in the mist. The yard, overgrown and forgotten, still held the bones of a garden. Wooden frames, a broken swing, a stubborn little tree that had never grown straight. He'd once promised to tear it out. Never did. Now for the first time in years, he wondered if it might still be alive. He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, once used to hold a family, then to bury them, then to push the world away. Tonight they had held a cup of cocoa. Tomorrow, he didn't know. But someone was sleeping in the garden shed under his roof, and that meant something had changed. And out back, barely noticeable in the corner of the yard, the crooked little sapling stood in the dark, waiting, like him, for the chance to grow again. Ethan barely slept that night. The wind howled through the trees behind the house, and the rain drummed steady on the tin roof. But that wasn't what kept him up. It was the weight in his chest. An old ache, stirred up by the sound of a child's muffled cough through the wall, and the memory of a different time, another winter, when laughter used to echo through these same floorboards. He sat at the kitchen table in the dim morning light, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee. Steam curled from the cup, warming his face but not his hands. They felt stiff like they always did when the weather turned. Outside, the rain had stopped. Mist curled low over the lawn, wrapping the yard in silence. He could hear them moving, in the shed. Soft shuffling, quiet voices. The kind of sounds people made when they didn't want to wake their host or risk wearing out their welcome. He didn't go to them. Not yet. Instead, he stared at the door to the shed from his kitchen window. That shed used to hold everything his wife had loved. Now it held two people he didn't know. Two people who, somehow, had unsettled the order he had built around himself like a fence. He'd built that fence after the accident, after the silence from his wife's family, the investigation, the whispered blame, after selling their second car to cover the funeral costs, after packing up her things and storing them in that very shed. And now, someone else was in there. Breathing new air into that sealed box of grief. His gut clenched. He'd told himself it was just for one night. He kept repeating it, but the words didn't hold anymore, because now it was morning. And they were still here. By mid-morning, the sun broke through for the first time in days. Ethan stepped out into the yard, the grass wet beneath his boots, the air sharp and clean. The shed door creaked open a few seconds later. She stepped out first, hair tied back hastily, face pale but focused. She wore a sweater of his wife's. He recognized it immediately, the blue one with the missing button near the collar. Behind her, the little girl followed, barefoot, her small fingers clutching a stuffed bear that looked like it had seen better days. Ethan said nothing. Neither did they. He turned and walked toward the workshop. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was fragile, like something neither of them wanted to break just yet. He flipped the lights on in the garage, pulled open the hood of her car. "Battery's dead," he called over his shoulder. "Alternator's not far behind." She lingered in the doorway. "I'll pay you." "No need." She hesitated. You already did too much. He glanced back at her, then at the girl who was now crouched beside a puddle, touching its surface with a quiet kind of fascination. What's her name? He asked. Mara. She talk? Sometimes. He nodded, bent over the engine. Again. I've got a spare battery, old but decent. I can find a motel by evening. He didn't look up. Nothing local's worth the trouble. She didn't reply. After a beat, he added, You can stay another night, if you want. It wasn't much, not a declaration, not an invitation, but it was a crack in the door, and she stepped through it. By afternoon, Mara was sitting on the steps of the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, watching Ethan work. He'd always been good with machines. They didn't talk back. They didn't ask questions. But this little girl, she didn't talk either, just watched. He felt her eyes on him like sunlight, warm, cautious, curious. Want to hand me that wrench? He asked, pointing. She blinked, then slowly stood, walked over, picked up the tool, and held it out to him. Their fingers touched. It was nothing. And it was everything. That night, over reheated soup and bread from the back of his freezer, they sat around the small table in his kitchen. She told him her name, Claire. No last name. No explanation. He didn't press. She asked him if he'd always lived here. Long enough, he said. She nodded, spooning soup into Mara's bowl with a tenderness that almost hurt to witness. After the girl fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that used to belong to his daughter, Claire stayed seated, hands wrapped around her mug. I'm not looking for anything, she said softly. We just needed to stop. Ethan nodded. She looked up, eyes dark and quiet. You don't know us. You don't have to let us stay. I know enough, he said. That surprised her. She tilted her head. What do you think you know? Ethan looked toward the window. Outside, the sapling bent in the breeze, still holding on. You ran from something that hurt you, and you're not sure you deserve to be safe. Silence. Then she said, What about you? He didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he said, I used to think closing every door would keep the bad out, but it also kept everything else out too. She looked down, tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. We can go tomorrow, she offered again, if it's too much. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The air was still. The moment was fragile. Then he shook his head. Stay. Just stay a little longer. Claire's eyes softened. Not gratitude exactly. Something older. A quiet knowing. A woman who had been told leave too many times and forgot what stay sounded like when it came from someone who meant it. Outside, the sapling swayed, thin but rooted. Inside, for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the need to lock every door. The next morning came soft and cold, a pale blue light creeping through the windows before the frost had a chance to melt. Ethan stood at the sink, coffee mug warming his hand, staring out at the shed again. But something had changed. It wasn't the shed. It was the way the yard looked now, with two small boot prints leading through dew-speckled grass. One large, one tiny. Temporary as fog. But they were there. He took a slow sip, his breath catching on the steam, and reminded himself again. They're not staying, just passing through. Don't start expecting things. He'd told himself that about a lot of things over the years, that the pain would pass, that the ache would dull. That grief had a finish line. None of it had been true. But still, when he heard the soft patter of footsteps on the back porch and the careful knock on his kitchen door, something in him stood straighter. Claire stood there holding two plates, each with a folded omelet and toast that smelled slightly burnt but honest. I found eggs, she said, almost sheepishly. Hope you don't mind. Ethan opened the door without a word, just stepped back and let her in. The kitchen, for years, had felt like a tomb, silent, orderly, untouched. Now it held the faint scent of frying butter and shampoo. Claire moved like someone who had spent too long on edge, who only recently remembered how to soften her steps. She set the plates down. I used to cook, she offered. He nodded. Tastes like someone who remembers how. They sat across from each other, the sounds of forks scraping plates strangely comforting, familiar in a way that didn't feel threatening. Where's Mara? He asked. Still, asleep. I think your house makes her feel safe. His throat tightened, unexpected. Funny, he said. I haven't thought of this place as safe in a long time. Claire looked around. It's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. She smiled a little. Not anymore. That afternoon, Ethan finally cleared the broken planter box behind the shed. It had once held tomatoes back when he and his wife tried to go rustic. Now it was a skeleton of weeds and rotted wood. Claire found him there, sleeves rolled up, dirt under his fingernails. Thought I might clean this up, he said, almost defensive. She didn't question it. Instead, she crouched beside him, her fingers tracing the cracked wood. We could plant something. He glanced over. We? She smiled, but it was more tired than playful. Mara needs something to care for. They worked in silence, pulling weeds, turning soil. Ethan found a shovel in the garage, rusted but serviceable. Claire unearthed a packet of old sunflower, seeds from the shed, long expired, but neither of them said it. Mara joined them as the sun dipped low, her cheeks pink from sleep. She didn't speak, just watched her mother dig a shallow trench, then quietly reached out to drop a few seeds in. She looked up at Ethan. He handed her the watering can without a word. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was, unmistakably, a beginning. That evening, Ethan opened the workshop for the first time in weeks, not for business, but because something needed doing. The workbench was covered in dust. He wiped it clean with an old rag, uncovered a plank of cedar he'd planned to toss. Instead, he measured and cut. By the time he was done, it was a small wooden box, hinged, smoothed, unfinished. He left it on the porch outside the shed with no note. The next morning, it was gone. But later, he found it again, back on his kitchen windowsill. This time with a tiny drawing tucked inside, a stick figure girl holding a flower standing next to a tall man in a hat. Between them, a crooked little tree. He stared at the picture for a long time. Then he folded it carefully, slid it into his wallet. They stayed another day, then another. Claire made breakfast. Mara watered the dirt where no sprouts had appeared yet. Ethan told himself it was just until the girl was stronger. Just until the roads were clearer. Just until he figured out what the right thing to do was. But by the fourth night, he'd fixed the leak in the shed roof. By the fifth, he brought a small heater from the garage. And by the sixth, he caught himself, saying our garden. People in town started to notice. Hazel from the bakery slipped an extra cinnamon roll into his bag. She's pretty, she said casually. That her daughter? No, Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. But Hazel only smiled. Not yet, huh? At the hardware store, old Will leaned on the counter, eyes crinkling behind scratched glasses. Haven't seen you in a while. Heard laughter coming from your yard yesterday. Thought maybe I'd gone crazy. Ethan said nothing. But later, as he drove home, he rolled down the window. Let the wind in. Let the silence go. That night, Claire found him sitting on the porch, mug in hand, watching the sky fade from amber to navy. She didn't sit, just stood beside him. She drew you, Claire said softly. In that picture. I saw. She doesn't draw strangers. I don't feel like one. A pause. Do you want us to leave? He looked up at her, eyes dark and steady. No, he said simply. But I still don't know what it means. If you stay. Claire nodded, her gaze far off. I don't know either, she whispered. But I haven't seen Mara sleep through the night in over a year. Until now. He looked back at the yard. The patch of dirt where seeds had been planted was still bare. But the earth had been turned. Something had changed. Maybe nothing would grow. But maybe it would. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan was willing to wait and see. The rain returned that night, gentle but persistent, drumming softly on the roof like someone too polite to knock louder. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink again, staring out through the fogged glass. The garden was just a patch of dark earth now, barely visible in the gloom. But he could still see the little wooden sign Mara had made that morning with Claire's help. Our garden, written in careful, wobbly letters. The words sat heavier in his chest than he expected. He hadn't used ours in a long time. Behind him, the kettle whistled. He turned off the flame, poured 2 mugs, and hesitated. Then he poured a third. They hadn't asked for anything tonight. No extra blankets, no tools, no favors. But something about the air felt still, like something was waiting to be said. He walked across the yard, the 3 mugs balanced carefully on a tray, water soaking through the knees of his jeans. He knocked softly on the shed door before opening it. Claire sat on the cot, feet curled beneath her, reading a worn paperback by lantern light. Mara was already asleep, buried under layers of mismatched blankets. Claire looked up, startled at first, then softened. "I brought tea," Ethan said. "Chamomile." She blinked, then nodded. "Thanks." He set the tray down on a crate and was halfway back to the door when her voice stopped him. "You don't have to go." He turned. Her face was unreadable. Tired, maybe, but clear. He glanced at the girl. "You sure?" "She sleeps hard," Claire said. "Dreams softer here." He sat on the crate, careful not to make a sound. Claire handed him one of the mugs. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence. Then Claire took a breath. "You ever run from something?" she asked. Ethan's jaw flexed. He stared into the steam curling from his mug. "No," he said. "But I've lost things I should have protected." Claire nodded like she understood, that kind of loss all too well. "I left him 2 months ago," she said softly. "We moved every few days. Sometimes I thought I saw him on a street corner or in a crowd, but maybe it was just my fear looking for a face." Ethan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the little girl, her brow smooth, breath slow and even. "He was charming at first," Claire continued. "The kind that knows what to say, when to smile. My friends said I was lucky." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Lucky?" Ethan didn't speak. He knew there was no right word to offer someone walking through fire. "I didn't see the bruises coming," she said. "Not at first, and when I did, I convinced myself they weren't real." Ethan's hand tightened around the mug. "He never hurt Mara," she said quickly. "Not with his hands. But children feel things." She looked up. "They feel when love turns into a trap." The words sat in the room like smoke curling into corners, sticking to walls. "He came home drunk one night, broke a lamp, shouted for hours. I thought Mara was asleep." Claire swallowed. "But the next morning she asked if I was going to die." Ethan's throat ached. "So I left," she said. "Took nothing but a bag and the car. I didn't even bring her toys." She looked down at her hands as if surprised to still see them there. "I'm not here because I'm strong," Claire said. "I'm here because I had nowhere else left to go." The lantern flickered. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the loose tin on the shed roof. "You are strong," Ethan said quietly. She looked at him, brows raised in disbelief. "Not because you left," he added, "but because you stayed gone." They sat like that a while. 2 broken people in a room full of old tools and borrowed hope, each nursing wounds no one else could see. Then Claire asked, "What about you?" Ethan hesitated. "I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident," he said. 4 years ago. December." Claire's breath caught. "They said I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. Truth is, I don't remember. The roads were slick. We argued at dinner." His voice faltered. "She wanted to move. I didn't." He swallowed. "There wasn't a drink in my system. But I still hear her voice, angry. I still see my daughters, hands gripping the back of my seat. I still wake up to headlights in the dark." Claire didn't move, didn't speak. "Her family blamed me," Ethan said. "I couldn't fight them, didn't want to. He exhaled shakily. I sold the second car, closed my father's garage, moved back here. I stopped trying. Claire reached forward slowly and placed her hand over his. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't comforting. It was a tether, a gesture that said, I see you, and you're not alone, in the dark anymore. Ethan didn't pull away. For the first time in years, he didn't want to. They sat like that until the lantern dimmed, and when Ethan finally rose to leave, he paused at the door. Claire's voice, barely above a whisper, followed him. I don't need a promise, I just need a reason to stop running. He turned. In the morning, he said, we'll build something, even if it's small. Outside, the sapling behind the house swayed in the wind, still bent, still rooted, still alive. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a place Ethan was passing time in. It felt almost a little bit like a home, not all at once, and not loudly. It came in the way the kitchen smelled like toast and cinnamon again, in the faint marks of a child's fingerprints on the window pane, in the sight of Claire brushing Mara's hair on the front steps, sun sliding down the wooden railing beside them. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of new sounds. On the 7th morning, Claire made blueberry pancakes with the last of the freezer berries. Mara helped, clumsily. The kitchen filled with smoke, laughter, and a smell Ethan had forgotten. Sweetness, cooked too long but somehow just right. He took his coffee outside and sat on the porch. The sapling behind the house still leaned east, crooked but alive. He'd meant to stake it years ago. He never had. He watched the sun catch in its young leaves and felt the stillness settle in his bones like warmth. Inside, Claire called to Mara. Breakfast! The little girl ran out onto the porch instead, holding a folded napkin in one hand and a single pancake in the other. She handed the pancake to Ethan with both hands, carefully, ceremonially, as if offering a gift that could change the course of someone's day. It did. Thanks, he murmured, voice catching more than it should have. She grinned, revealing the space where a front tooth had recently gone missing. Later that day, Ethan drove into town for supplies. Not because they were out, but because he wanted to. Hazel at the bakery gave him an extra loaf without asking. Will, the old carpenter, asked if he needed help with that garden project. Sheriff Boone tipped his hat, nodded toward the passenger seat. Heard you've got company. Just folks passing through, Ethan said. Funny, the sheriff replied. That's what you said last week. On the drive home, Ethan picked up a small bundle of lumber, 2 new paintbrushes, and a packet of flower seeds Mara had been eyeing on their last trip. He didn't know if they'd take root, but the thought of her face when she opened them made it worth the doubt. In the afternoons, they worked in the yard. Claire wore one of Ethan's old flannels, sleeves rolled. Mara danced between wheelbarrow and hose like a butterfly with muddy feet. They pulled weeds from the edge of the fence, repainted the sagging porch rails. Ethan found himself humming as he worked, low, absent-minded, and only realized it when Claire joined in under her breath. Once she paused, brush mid-stroke, and looked at him. You whistle when you're concentrating. He blinked, surprised. I used to whistle lullabies. To your daughter? He nodded. She hated it. Said I was always off-key. Claire smiled, soft and sad. Mara hums in her sleep sometimes. Only started that here. They went quiet again, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that meant nothing needed fixing. That night, after Mara had fallen asleep on the couch with a coloring book in her lap, Claire and Ethan sat in the living room, sharing a blanket neither of them mentioned. A fire crackled in the old wood stove. The light from it danced along the floor, painting shadows on the walls like they were telling a story in a language no one had spoken in years. Claire sipped her tea slowly. Do you ever think about leaving here? She asked. Used to, Ethan said. A lot. Why didn't you? I thought I was staying for her, for memory. Truth is, I stayed because it was easier to be alone here than to start over anywhere else. Claire nodded, looking into the flames. I wonder sometimes if staying still is brave or just hiding. Maybe both, he said. Depends who you're staying for. Their eyes met. Not in search of answers, just recognition. Claire leaned back, her shoulder brushing. His not a lean of romance, a lean of trust. Ethan didn't move. I forgot what it felt like, she said softly. What? To feel held. Even when no one's touching you. He didn't speak. Just let her words settle between them like falling ash. By the 10th day, Mara had drawn a new picture. This time there were 3 figures, one taller, 2 small, a house behind them, and a crooked little tree beside it, bigger than before. She didn't give it to anyone, just taped it to the wall in the shed, above her bed. When Ethan saw it later, he didn't say a word. But he touched the paper once, lightly like it might vanish if he pressed too hard. And that night when the rain returned, he didn't flinch, didn't shut the curtains. He let it fall. Let it wash the roof, the porch, the soil. The sapling behind the house bent in the wind but held. So did he. It began with a sound that didn't belong. A low rumble on the gravel road just past dusk. Too heavy for a local truck, too late for deliveries. Ethan paused mid-chop in the kitchen, knife hovering over a carrot, his breath stilling. The headlight slid across the front window and stopped. Claire froze in the doorway. Ethan turned slowly. Her face had already gone pale. Is it him? He asked. She didn't answer. But her hand found the edge of the table, gripped it hard enough, her knuckles went white. Outside, the engine idled, then clicked off. Ethan moved to the front window, careful not to break the curtain's edge. He saw the man the moment the door opened. Clean-shaven, city jacket. Confident steps. The kind of man who never knocks, just assumes everything already belongs to him. Claire was behind him now, whispering. He found us. How? I don't know. Maybe the plate. Maybe someone posted something without thinking. Ethan looked at her. Is he dangerous? She nodded, lips pressed thin. He won't hurt Mara. Not directly. He'll smile. For that. But he'll make me pay for leaving. Quietly. Legally. Or not. Ethan glanced at the coat rack. His hand went to the hook where the rusted crowbar still hung. Not much, but solid. His other hand found the lock on the door. Go out the back, he said. I'm not running, she whispered. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to keep her safe. Claire looked at him for a long second, then nodded, turned, and disappeared into the hallway. A knock came. Sharp. Measured. Not loud, but confident. A man used to being let in. Ethan opened the door just enough to meet his eyes. You must be the mechanic, the man said, offering a smile that didn't reach his gaze. Is Claire here? Ethan didn't answer. She's my wife, the man added. Or was. We're working through things. People working through things don't send cops or lawyers. The man tilted his head. You're not family, not law, so let's not complicate this. Ethan stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. The porch creaked under their weight. The wind had picked up. The sapling in the yard was barely visible in the fading light, but Ethan could feel it behind him like a memory that refused to stay buried. You drove a long way, Ethan said. The man's expression tightened. Longer than I should have. Had to. Then drive back. She took my daughter. She took your hostage, Ethan said, stepping forward. Let's be clear. There was a beat of silence. The wind cut through it like a blade. I know your type, the man said, his voice colder now. Wounded, lonely. You see a girl and think she's your second chance. Ethan didn't flinch. And I know yours. Clean clothes, clean records, dirty hands. The man smiled again. This isn't over. Ethan's voice dropped. It is here. The man stepped down from the porch. We'll see. He didn't slam the door on his truck. Didn't speed off. just drove away, slow, deliberate, like a man making a promise. Ethan stood still long after the headlights were gone. Inside, Claire was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, arms wrapped tight around Mara. The little girl looked up when Ethan entered. Her eyes were wide but dry. She didn't ask questions, just waited. "He's gone," Ethan said. "For now." Claire didn't answer. "He won't come back tonight." Still nothing. Then, softly, she asked, "How did you stay so calm?" Ethan sat beside her, the floor cool against his spine. "I wasn't," he said. "I just remembered what mattered more." Claire looked down at Mara. "She's the only thing I ever did right," she whispered. Ethan said nothing. He reached forward, gently touched Mara's blanket-covered shoulder. "She's not the only thing," he said. Claire blinked at him. "You left," he said. "That takes more strength than most men I've known." Claire leaned her head against the wall. The silence between them was no longer fragile. It was heavy, real, earned. "He won't stop," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then we won't either." Later, that night, Ethan checked the locks. Twice. Pulled a shotgun from the back closet he hadn't opened in 4 years. Cleaned it, loaded it. Then he sat on the porch, moonlight spilling onto the boards, and listened to the wind. The sapling swayed, thin and tired, but holding. He would stay up all night if he had to. That girl was asleep under his roof. That woman had planted roots in the soil beside his own. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew what he was willing to protect now. And that changed everything. The next 24 hours passed like they were holding their breath. Ethan didn't sleep, not deeply. Every noise stirred him. Wind through the trees, the creak of the old porch boards, the distant hum of tires on the highway. His hand rested on the shotgun beside the door. His boots stayed on. Claire moved quietly around the house, tension coiled beneath her skin. Mara didn't ask questions, but she clung to her mother's side more than usual, her eyes scanning windows like she knew a storm was waiting just out of sight. They all knew it. By midday, Ethan drove to town and spoke to Sheriff Boone. "He came by," Ethan said. "Didn't raise a hand, but he'll be back." Boone leaned on his patrol truck, arms crossed. "You want me to call it in?" "He's smart," Ethan replied. "Knows the law, won't make trouble until he's sure. He can't lose." Boone looked past him, toward the mountains in the distance. "Man like that usually waits for a window. He'll come when it's dark, or when he thinks you're gone." Ethan nodded. "I'll be ready." Before he left, Boone handed him a burner phone. "Just in case," he said. "Use it. No shame in calling backup." Ethan didn't argue. He just tucked it into his coat and drove home slow. The yard was quiet when he returned. Too quiet. He parked, stepped out, and heard it, a soft crack, like a foot on dry wood. The back gate. He moved fast, heart pounding in his chest like it used to in the old days, before grief, before numbness dulled everything. He rounded the side of the house just in time to see the man, the same polished jacket, same arrogant stride, stepping out of the shed with Mara in his arms. Time slowed. Claire screamed. The man froze. Ethan raised the shotgun. "Put her down." The barrel wavered, slightly in his grip, but his voice didn't. Mara didn't cry. She just looked at Ethan, her face pale but calm, like she somehow knew he wouldn't let this end badly. "You're not thinking straight," the man said, shifting Mara in his arms. "She's mine. I have every right." Ethan stepped closer, slow and certain. "You lost the right the moment she stopped feeling safe in your arms. Claire's manipulating you. She ran because she wanted sympathy." "No," Ethan said, voice low. "She ran because you're the kind of man that makes a woman believe dying might be quieter than staying." That stopped him. "I'm not fluffing," Ethan added. "Put her down, or I swear." Claire appeared behind him then, voice shaking but sharp as glass. "Let her go, or so help me I will bury you." The man stared at her, at Ethan, at the gun, and for the first time he looked unsure. "You won't shoot me?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Try me. Another beat passed. Then, slowly, the man bent and set Mara down. The little girl ran straight to Ethan, who lowered the gun just long enough to scoop her up with one arm. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he held on. Claire stepped forward and stood beside him. You're done here, she said. You come back and I'll press every charge this town can muster. You think no one believes women like me? Try a whole town that knows men like him. Boone's cruiser turned the corner just then, lights flashing silently. The timing wasn't perfect, it was right. Like the town itself had waited long enough. The man didn't say another word. He turned, climbed into his car, and drove away, without looking back. Boone got out and gave Ethan a long look. You all right? Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy kneeling, holding Mara against his chest as her small arms clung around his neck. Her heart was racing, so was his, but it was still beating, and so was hers. That night, the house was quiet again, but in a different way, a deeper silence, one earned. Claire stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the sapling. Its branches trembled in the wind, but it hadn't broken. Neither had they. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, shoulders slumped, hands wrapped around a mug of tea he hadn't touched. You could have been killed, Claire said. He nodded. But you weren't. No. She turned to face him. You didn't have to do it. I did, Ethan said. Why? He looked up. Because if I didn't, I'd lose more than I already have. And I can't go back to being a man who lets things slip through his fingers. Claire moved closer. He stood. She reached up and touched his face, gently, fingertips tracing a scar near his temple. I thought I'd never feel safe again, she said. I thought I didn't deserve to protect anything again, he replied. They stood like that for a long time. No kiss, no confession, just breath and silence and the shared knowledge that something had changed. Outside, the sapling still swayed in the wind, but now it was staked, steady, stronger than before. So was he. It happened just after midnight. The wind had died, the house silent, the world finally exhaling. Claire was asleep on the couch, a book still open in her lap. Mara, tucked safely in the shed, surrounded by the toys Ethan had quietly repaired, the softest blanket folded just so across her chest. Ethan was finally resting too, one hand still resting on the shotgun beside the door, just in case. But for the first time in days, he'd allowed himself to close his eyes. The smell came first, faint, then rising, acrid, electrical. Then came the glow. It was Mara's scream that woke him. He bolted upright, heart thundering, eyes drawn immediately to the orange flicker outside the front window. The shed. It was on fire. He didn't think. The door crashed open behind him before the shotgun hit the floor. Barefoot, half-dressed, he ran through the yard, gravel cutting his soles. The flames licked high into the night sky, cracking wood, snapping glass. Smoke poured through the open windows. Mara! Claire screamed, close behind. Ethan hit the shed door with his shoulder. It gave after the second blow. Heat seared his skin, but he moved blind through it, muscle memory and desperation guiding him. He found her curled in the far corner, eyes wide, coughing. She was frozen. He lifted her, cradled her to his chest, and ran. The roof groaned behind them. Seconds after they crossed the threshold, the structure collapsed inward, a plume of sparks shooting skyward like fireworks from hell. They hit the ground hard. Ethan on his back, Mara pressed to his chest, Claire falling beside them, grabbing her daughter and holding her so tightly it looked like she was trying to pull her back into her own body. Mara coughed, but she was alive. They all were. But the shed was gone, and with it, everything that had slowly begun to feel like home. The firefighters came quickly, Boone trailing close behind. A short circuit, they said. Old wiring, dry wood. A perfect storm. Ethan sat on the back steps, a damp towel around his shoulders, his hands shaking, jaw clenched. Claire stood in the yard with Mara, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching the embers burn themselves out. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to say. The next morning was gray, not storm gray, not angry, just hollow. Like the sky itself had gone quiet. Ethan moved slowly through the ash, kicking gently at debris, looking for anything salvageable. He found a melted hinge, a burned corner of Mara's drawing. He sank to his knees and picked it up, blackened but not fully gone. A corner still showed 3 stick figures, 1 crooked tree, and something red that might have been a flower. He folded it carefully, slid it into his coat pocket and stood. Claire came up behind him. "Wasn't your fault," she said. "I built it," Ethan replied. "I wired it. I should have checked. We all thought we were safe." He looked at her, eyes dark. "You trusted me and I saved her," Claire cut in. He didn't respond. She stepped closer. "That night, the crash, you didn't let them down. That was an accident." Her voice broke. "This wasn't. This was life reminding us nothing stays." He closed his eyes. She reached up and touched his face again, palm warm against his skin. "But some things do," she said. He opened his eyes, and in hers, for the first time, he saw, not fear, but faith. Later, Mara knelt in the yard, digging at the base of the sapling. The soil was wet from the firefighters' hoses. Ash laced through it like veins. Ethan watched her. The tree still stood, charred on one side but green on the other, leaves trembling but holding. "She wants to bury something," Claire said, beside him. "What?" "I don't know. Maybe the night." Mara pressed something into the dirt. Her bare, half-burned but whole enough. She patted soil over it gently, then stood. Ethan stepped forward and sank the new stake into the ground beside the sapling. He tied the trunk gently, support, not restraint. Then he stood back, beside them. The tree swayed in the breeze. Scorched. Bent, still growing, just like them. That night they slept inside the house. All of them. Together. No one said the word family. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a borrowed word. And in the front room, on the windowsill, the half-burned drawing sat framed in glass, smoke-smudged but visible, proof that even in the fire some things survive. The ash lingered for days, not just in the yard, not just in the air, but in the way Ethan moved. The way Claire kept glancing at Mara's drawings as if expecting them to vanish. The way Mara sat in the doorway, hugging her knees to her chest, quiet in a way that made the silence feel heavy again. But then, on the morning of the 4th day, the first knock came. Will, the carpenter. He stood on the porch, hands in the pockets of his faded overalls, a bundle of lumber strapped to the back of his old Ford. "Figure you'll need this," he said. Ethan blinked at him. "You brought wood?" "Don't know if you heard," Will said, scratching his beard. "But this town's real fond of building things from scratch." Before Ethan could answer, another car pulled up. Hazel. She stepped out with 2 boxes, one full of muffins, one full of secondhand clothes. "I don't bake well under pressure," she said, "but I do bake well under grief." Boone showed. Up next, then Annie from the diner, then 3 of the high school boys who used to mow lawns for pocket money. One had a hammer, one had a wheelbarrow. One brought a 6-pack and said he wasn't sure what to do, but he'd be damned if he didn't do something. By noon, the yard was alive with noise, hammers, voices, laughter trying its luck, and Ethan, who had spent 4 years pushing the world away, found himself standing in the middle of it, stunned. Claire touched his arm. "They showed up for you." He shook his head. "They showed up for you, and her." "No," she said, eyes steady. "They showed up because you didn't close the door this time. The rebuild wasn't perfect. The boards didn't always line up clean. The paint peeled, in places even fresh. The shed, no, the house they were building was small, but solid. Mara painted a mural on one inside wall, A crooked tree with deep roots and big leaves, colored in crayon strokes and careful hands. At the base of the tree were 3 figures again, this time holding hands. She didn't say a word when Ethan saw it. She just handed him the crayon. He stared at it for a moment, then carefully drew in a 4th figure. A dog. They didn't have one. Not yet. But maybe one day. At night, the porch glowed with lantern light. Claire sat on the steps while Ethan tightened the last railing bolts. Mara curled up in a chair behind them, watching stars instead of screens, wrapped in an old quilt stitched with more memory than thread. Claire looked over at him. "You're different," she said. "Older, softer." He chuckled. "I used to be soft. Once before." She nodded. Maybe grief doesn't harden us. Maybe it just puts us underground for a while. He looked out at the sapling. "I didn't think anything could grow here again." "You were wrong." He didn't mind hearing that. Not this time. A week later, the town called it finished. The structure stood where the shed had been, but it wasn't a shed anymore. It was theirs. Painted a pale green, one window framed with flowers, one door that creaked when it closed like it already had stories. There was a table inside, small, handmade. Will had carved it with calloused hands and a quiet smile. 3 chairs, one tiny. Ethan set down a plate. Claire poured tea. Mara passed around forks with careful hands. No speech, no celebration. Just bread, butter, and the warmth of being together without fear. Boone tipped his hat as he left. Hazel gave Mara a new stuffed bear. Will stayed a little longer, watched Ethan from the doorway. "You gonna be okay?" he asked. Ethan looked at Claire, then Mara. "I think I already am." Will nodded. "Don't wait so long next time." "Next time? To let people in?" Ethan smiled. "I won't." Will winked. "Damn right you won't. This town has long memories but soft hearts." That night, Ethan sat out on the back steps alone. Claire had gone to tuck Mara in. The stars above the sapling shimmered like scattered salt. The tree stood taller now. Not straighter, but taller. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, leaned forward and dug his fingers gently into the earth at its base. Just to feel it, to ground himself. He whispered, not to anyone in particular, but maybe to the wind, or to those who no longer sat at his table. "We're still here," and that somehow felt like enough. Spring came slowly to Edgefield. The frost receded in whispers, not declarations. Birds returned like careful guests, and the sapling, the one no one had believed in, pushed out its first cluster of bright green leaves. Ethan noticed it first. Standing by the garden, coffee in hand, early light falling across his porch, the leaves shimmered in the breeze like tiny hands waving "We made it." He smiled. It was the first real smile in a long, long time. Inside, the house was alive. Claire was humming softly as she packed Mara's lunch. Peanut butter, apples, a note, tucked secretly in the fold. The girl had started school last week, and each morning she left a drawing on the table for Ethan. Today's showed 3 people and a dog again, this time with a name scribbled over it, Benny. When he'd asked about it, she just shrugged and said, "He's not here yet, but he will be." Ethan had no doubt. The table in the kitchen was the one Will built, scratched already, stained with syrup and pencil shavings, and somehow more beautiful for it. A photo sat in the center now, Mara beaming, holding a seedling in a clay pot. Claire beside her, Ethan behind them, half smiling, as if he wasn't used to being seen that way yet. Because he wasn't. But he was learning. Later, that afternoon they worked in the garden, Claire on her knees weeding, Ethan fixing the trellis, Mara planting flowers along the walkway with firm, determined hands. "Will these grow tall?" she asked. "Maybe," Ethan said. "If they're loved enough." She nodded solemnly, like someone entrusted with something sacred. The sun was warm but gentle. A breeze passed through the yard, stirring the scent of soil and lavender. The house behind them stood sturdy, sunlit, painted now with fingerprints and the stories of people who chose to stay. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the sapling. It had grown nearly 2 feet, still crooked, still imperfect, still standing. Claire walked up beside him, brushing her arm lightly against his. "It made it," she said. "So did we," Ethan replied. She looked up at him. Her smile was small, quiet, but unshakable. "We never promised forever," she said. "No," he murmured. She slipped her fingers into his. "But I choose us. Today." He tightened his grip, gently. "And tomorrow I'll choose again." Mara ran to them, arms out, dirt on her cheek and knees. "Come see," she cried. "It's growing." They followed her to the flower bed, crouched beside her. New sprouts, still trembling but pushing through. Life. Messy, uneven, unplanned, but real. That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket, watching fireflies blink across the yard like tiny stars getting closer. Claire leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. Mara fell asleep, curled in her lap, clutching a little wooden dog Ethan had carved the night before. The sapling behind the house swayed gently in the breeze. No lightning, no threats, just wind, and breath, and peace. Ethan looked out at the yard, one last time before heading inside. The house wasn't perfect. Neither were they. But there was love in the walls now, laughter in the air, and roots in the ground. He could feel it all settling into place, not as an ending, but as the kind of beginning that only comes after fire and frost. And as he turned off the porch light, he whispered, not to be heard, but to be held. "We don't need forever, just today, and the courage to choose it again tomorrow." The sapling behind the house stood quietly in the dark, growing, always growing. If this story touched your heart, stay with us. Let every quiet morning, every rebuilt home, every crooked little tree be a reminder. Healing is not fast, but it is always possible. Choose to stay. Choose to grow each day. Not every family is born. Some are chosen, some are built. One quiet day at a time. If this story found its way to your heart, leave a light on for us. Like, subscribe, stay a while.